This is Regine Webster, Vice President of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. We are so pleased to be hosting this webinar, the Midwest Early Recovery Fund, Supporting Children in Disasters. This work, funded by the Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies, ensures that children's welfare is really taken into careful account in the wake of low-attention disasters that occur across the Midwest. And in the minutes that follow, you're going to hear all about our work, as well as the work of our colleague organizations in this very important space. I'm pleased to be joined today by leaders of the Children's Working Group who will share their expertise and experience with us. Cari Logan is the Disaster Case Manager with Lutheran Social Services of North Dakota. Aren King is the U.S. Emergencies Specialist with Save the Children. Nett is the Community Resilience Manager with Childcare Aware of America. And Peet is the Senior Program Manager with Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota, Camp Noah. Before we dive in, I've got a couple things of housekeeping for you. First off, this webinar is being recorded, and at the conclusion of the call, you all will get an email from us with the link to that recording, including the slides that you're going to be seeing over the course of the next 59 minutes. You are more than welcome to submit a question to us at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We ask that you don't raise your hands because we won't go live audio for participants, so just use that chat box, please, or excuse me, that Q&A box. And over the course of the webinar, we absolutely will do our best to get all of your questions answered. We were due to be joined today by Nancy Beers, my colleague and Program Director of the Midwest Early Recovery Fund. She had an unexpected conflict arise and is unable to join our call today, but we very much hope that all of us other speakers on today's call will be helpful and insightful along the way. And now I'd like to turn our attention to Cari Logan, who's going to share with us more about the Midwest Low Attention Disasters Children's Working Group. Hi, Cari.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. I am just going to start out here again is the list of who is involved in the initial group for conversation about our Midwest Low Attention Disasters Children's Working Group. And so you will hear from all of these groups today during our presentation. And I wanted to just start a little bit about how we got started and why we're here today. So for me, one of my favorite statements, which I will attribute to a local TV journalist in Moore, Oklahoma after the 2013 tornadoes, he said that it's often said that our children are resilient. And that is true. However, they cannot do it alone. And I find that statement to be a driving force behind the work that I do. And I think behind the work that we all do, as you'll hear about from our organizations with children after disasters, because I believe that it's true, that hope is real, that resilience is possible, and that children and families and communities and their caregivers can recover holistically. However, they cannot do it alone. And after disaster, communities have many needs, and you'll hear about some of those needs as we present throughout the day. But one of those needs is often assistance for their children and the caregivers of those children, those teachers, parents, child care providers, and social workers who already provide amazing service to those children and work to aid the recovery of those children and families. However, they cannot do it alone. So our group began and started this conversation about this initial question: what are the current program and services that are available for children, which you'll see that in these programs that we have today that we're going to talk about, and others. And then how do we begin to collectively put that information together and move the needle, so to speak, to move us forward. So our purpose really is to begin to develop more strategic partnerships with resources to support children and their caregivers as they recover from natural disasters. And we are all working in the Midwest primarily. And to start thinking and learning and then sharing that information with each other and with those others who are interested in this idea. So we find that the challenge that we're facing is that there are a lot of resources. There are a lot of people doing work with children on an everyday basis that could potentially influence this work that we do as well as there are programs that are specifically for disaster response for children. But there's not enough collective information that's well understood or easily accessible and that there needs to be a connection between funding and that interest in funding and supporting children after disaster and the capacity and the programs that are available to do that in community. So our objective as we gather is really, again, to gather stakeholders into the conversation, and then ultimately to create a list or a resource guide for communities and for funders to have, so they can see how to engage in delivering programs and services to children after disaster. And so that's part of our anticipated outcomes as well, is that as we are together, we begin to collect these resources and ideas. We have stories and testimonials and evidence about what successful programs and services are and what grant making looks like for that, and that ultimate hope for a resource guide to do that. So today we wanted to share with you a little bit. We had, and I'll share with you later, but we did have an initial gathering together in Minneapolis, and so we'll share some of the outcomes of that. But each of the programs, we wanted to give each of the programs that initiated and started this working group a chance to share about their work, and they each work in different, all around the disaster phases, but they also work in specific areas, and they're going to share about preparedness resources, some response work, and then also recovery work. So that is where we're headed today during this time.
Thank you so much, Cari. Sorry about that. I muted myself. Well, let's go ahead. First of all, thank you so much, Cari, for setting the stage on our discussion and really providing that context and background. Let's go ahead and hear from Nett at Childcare Aware.
Thanks, Cari, and thanks, Regine. This is Nett, and I'm the Community Resilience Manager at Childcare Aware of America. So the population that we work most closely with are the caregivers who are caring for children when they're not with their parents throughout the day, and primarily children who are under the age of 6 and not yet in the school system. Children make up nearly 25% of the population in the U.S., and throughout the nation, nearly 15 million children under the age of 6 have all of their parents in the workforce. So while those parents are in the workforce or attending school or training opportunities, they are in the care of childcare providers, whether it's a home-based childcare provider, a preschool, a Head Start program, or a center-based program. So those individuals that are caring for those children need to be well prepared for disasters, and parents actually put their trust in those caregivers to be well prepared if an emergency should happen. The childcare workforce consists of approximately 4.7 million childcare providers in the U.S., so that's a big task to undertake to make sure that those caregivers are well prepared. So that's one thing that our organization really takes upon themselves and makes a priority. When a disaster happens, it can really wreak havoc on childcare programs. Following disasters like flooding, wildfires, tornadoes, childcare providers may be forced to close their program, rebuild, or in some cases, they close their doors forever, and that really impacts all areas of a community. For young children who do best when their lives have predictable caregivers, predictable schedules, and surroundings, the emotional stress can cause developmental challenges with lifelong implications. So what we're focused on with emergency preparedness, response, and recovery is really that well-being of children, families, and ultimately communities. That's why we're committed to ensuring that the childcare sector has the support that it needs during times of crisis. So our emergency preparedness team is taking on those challenges head on so that the childcare provider industry can get back on their feet and return to the important work of caring for children after a disaster happens. Childcare Aware of America is based in Arlington, Virginia, but we're a membership-based nonprofit organization that serves all of the nation. We work with more than 572 state and local childcare resource and referral agencies across the country to help ensure that parents have access to affordable, quality childcare. So at Childcare Aware of America, when we work closely with those organizations from across the country, they're primarily focused on helping families find childcare when they maybe have a new baby in their family or their children need care. We have access to information on licensed childcare providers in their area and consumer ed materials to help families make a good choice for their children. Childcare resource and referral agencies are also the trusted source for training, technical assistance, and resources for that childcare workforce. They train almost 750,000 childcare providers every year. Another goal of childcare resource and referral offices is to keep a pulse on what the community needs are for childcare, to really strategize and offer options for recruiting and retaining childcare providers so that we can have stable communities and safe places for children while parents are working or in school. Next slide, please. One of the things that childcare resource and referral agencies spend a lot of time on is training childcare providers. And we've been fortunate over the last 3 years to have grant money available specific to 3 states in the Midwest to really bolster training and technical assistance for childcare providers. We work hand in hand with the childcare resource and referrals, and we worked closely with Childcare Aware of Minnesota, Childcare Aware of Kansas, and Childcare Resource Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to really help them improve their training and technical assistance that's available to childcare providers. Childcare providers found it helpful to talk to one another about what they should put in their emergency plan, as well as how they would find out about hazards in their area and communicate to families if they were in the midst of a disaster. Next slide, please. So what we primarily do at Childcare Aware of America with our emergency programs is when a disaster strikes, we can work hand in hand with those childcare resource and referral organizations to determine the needs and see what the impact of that disaster is. We have some damage assessment surveys that we have available. We have mobile texting programs that can help childcare providers understand how to respond to those surveys. And really, ultimately, what it does is helps us see what the need is to get the childcare industry back up and running after a disaster happens. We also have some mapping capability where we can show community members, emergency personnel, and childcare resource and referral agencies where their focuses should be and where they should prioritize the resources that are available. And then also after a disaster happens, we work with communities to help them locate temporary childcare. Oftentimes the infrastructure for childcare is damaged, so we need to find temporary locations to make childcare available to those children in the community. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, one of the projects that we worked closely with over the past couple of years was in Minnesota. And the picture that you have on your screen right now shows the aftermath of a tornado that happened in the southeast corner of the state just this past fall. So what we did at Childcare Aware of America is we worked closely with our partners at Childcare Aware of Minnesota to do outreach and find out what the impact was to childcare programs. And then we worked with partners such as the Center for Disaster Philanthropy to supplement grant dollars that were available through Childcare Aware of Minnesota to ensure that those providers that were impacted had the resources that they needed to rebuild and make care available to children again. Next slide, please. This picture here shows children in Florida that we worked with after Hurricane Irma. We were able to work with partners to send essential resources to provide to childcare programs after they were impacted by the hurricane. So, just like I said earlier, ensuring that the stability and the routines that are there for those kids is made available to them. So that's what we're trying to do at Childcare Aware of America, is work on all of the different levels of disaster through preparedness, with training and technical assistance, with the response process, with mapping for childcare providers and seeing where the damages are and where priorities should be placed, and then with recovery too, helping to see how we can work with partners to send needed resources to those programs and work hand in hand with those individuals that were impacted to reopen and make care available again.
Holly, thank you so much for that. I just think it's amazing how you really do take into account every aspect of a child's life and every aspect of a disaster, and how you really work to bring those two together. So it's so impressive what you all are doing. Let's go ahead now and turn our attention to Aren King, who's going to talk to us about Save the Children's work in general, and then specifically around the organization's work in North Carolina. Aren?
Thanks, Regine. This is Aren King with Save the Children. I'm a U.S. preparedness specialist focused on a project within the Midwest. However, we all wear many hats. And so one of the things that I get to do on a regular basis is provide training across the country. That's one of the many things that Save the Children brings to the table in terms of emergencies and disasters. At Save the Children, we're passionately committed to giving the world's children, especially the most vulnerable, what every child deserves: a healthy start in life, the opportunity to learn, and protection from harm, all of which can be affected by any natural disaster. Thanks to our supporters, we've served 155 million children in 2017 across the world in 120 countries, including 237,000 right here in the United States. With that, our domestic emergencies unit of Save the Children is committed to providing technical assistance, training, response, and preparedness and recovery resources throughout the country, particularly in states that are most vulnerable and areas where children live in rural, impoverished communities across the United States. We've been providing support services since Hurricane Katrina in terms of disasters, and our emergency response team is ready to deploy to any catastrophic event across the country. With that, we know that disasters can strike anywhere at any time, and more natural disasters are happening in the US than any other nation. More types, more frequency, etc. Each day in the United States, 69 million children are in school or programs away from their families should disaster strike. So as part of our mission, we are looking forward to continuing to strengthen and build capacities across the United States. With that, my project specifically in the Midwest is targeted to Arkansas and Nebraska in partnership with Arkansas VOAD and Nebraska VOAD. And we aim to build capacity in emergencies for children. So we're bringing together stakeholders on a regular basis that bring multiple sectors together. So emergency management, childcare providers, after school programs, state licensure, etc., all to the same table to have the same conversations about preparedness, response, and recovery. With that, during response times, we see a huge need after disasters to make sure that children are getting the resources that they need. So through Save the Children, we're able to offer emergency distribution of supplies. We also provide child-friendly spaces, which is a safe space for children to have the opportunity to play with other children and get back to a sense of normalcy while they're staying in shelters and or while they're visiting these assistance centers like multi-agency resource centers or disaster recovery centers. We're also providing emergency grants during the aftermath of many disasters. So the two people on the screen right now are, they work at Brigade Boys and Girls Club in North Carolina, who we've recently partnered with for emergency subgrants to help keep their doors open and get the children within the community who are the most vulnerable back into a safe place with adults that they're comfortable sharing their emotions and psychosocial well-being factored into all of the contributions that they're making to the community. And in addition to that, organizations like Brigade Boys and Girls Club are locally supporting community members. So following Hurricane Florence, we saw specifically this organization provide emergency relief to the community, such as distributing water or providing hygiene kits. And we are one of many partners that is able to provide some of those resources and supplies to community partners like Brigade. In addition to our emergency subgrants, our emergency distributions, and child-friendly spaces, we also look for opportunities to partner with local tongue-tied. We also look for opportunities to partner with child care providers through child care resource and referral agencies. We do this by providing long-term subgrants to child care facilities and or child care resource and referral agencies to help them recover fully from the disaster. Through this, we also provide a lot of recovery training, such as the training that we're offering this week here in near Gatlinburg, Tennessee. We also have a wide array of trainings that we offer on a regular basis, such as take-home preparedness, helping children cope, helping caregivers recover, and childcare and in mass care settings, childcare emergency preparedness as well. And then our staple program, the Prep Rally, which includes a highly interactive workshop and activities for children and for their providers in order to engage them in emergency preparedness 24/7. More information about our Prep Rally program and other trainings can be found at savethechildren.org/getready. With Hurricane Florence, we did deploy up to 32 staff and volunteers at one time to respond to the hurricane in North Carolina. At the time that we deployed staff and volunteers, we weren't sure if the impacts were going to be specific to North Carolina or if they were also going to be spread across South Carolina. So with that, we pre-deployed and pre-positioned supplies. We were able to distribute emergency supplies before the hurricanes even hit in evacuation shelters within North Carolina, and continue relationship building and partnering with other organizations that we had worked with during Hurricane Matthew and new organizations that are now wonderful partners of ours. We're continuing to support North Carolina. We've done this through emergency distributions as well as providing child-friendly spaces during the immediate response, and then providing emergency subgrants to more than 13 organizations. We are now providing 4 long-term recovery grants to child-serving institutions to help organizations such as childcare providers open their doors and remain open so that the economic impacts on families are decreased and so that children have a safe place to return to normal. A lot of our programming is very specific and unique to each disaster that we're working in. However, we know that by building best practices and guidance that can serve the whole country, we can make a bigger change. So with our projects, such as the project in Arkansas and Nebraska, we're really looking forward to learning from other partner organizations about what the unique needs of children may be pertaining to their specific circumstances. We're also a thought leader working with the National Commission for Children in Disasters consecutively since 2005. And our organization is committed to serving children every single day and in times of disaster. In addition to our emergency programs, we also provide programming in education and health and well-being. Thanks, Regine.
Thanks so much, Aren. I love hearing about Save the Children's work, and in particular, I always love hearing about child-friendly spaces. Having seen how important child-friendly spaces are, where they're safe and they're playing, while their parents can go about the work of recovery and know that their children are being loved and tended to in just the right way. It doesn't matter if it's domestically or around the world. They're just such gifts to community. So thank you so much for telling us about that, as well as more about your work following Hurricane Florence, as well as Save's overarching work. Let's go ahead and turn over now to David Peet, who's going to talk to us about Camp Noah and the recovery work that his organization does with children. Hi, David. Hi,
thanks, Regine. Good afternoon, everybody. And real quick, I find that I'm pretty thankful to be part of this group. And as Aren and Holly and Cari were talking, like, you realize that it's really a group effort and different organizations have different roles. And through that, we're able to hopefully meet the needs of the children that have been impacted by disaster. So I'm thankful to be here today. All right, well, I'd like to share with you a little bit about Camp Noah and who we are and kind of how our program works and kind of the things that we're trying to advance through our program. We are a part of Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota. We've been around since 1997, and we were created in response to flooding up on the border between North Dakota and Minnesota. Caseworkers and families were sharing experiences with children up there that they were seeing regressive behaviors, things that the kids really hadn't been exhibiting prior to the disaster. And so they were looking for a program that could address those needs, and that's how Camp Noah was born. And so we offer hope and healing to communities impacted by disaster. And that comes in the form of 30 hours of therapeutic programming of resiliency and preparedness. And oftentimes, and most often, our program is delivered in a week-long camp. And we partner with local organizations in the community to kind of help make it possible. And kind of what I want to do now is I'd like to share with you the overall kind of theme of our curriculum and how the curriculum flows together to give you an idea of the impact of the program. So our goal is to equip each child with resiliency skills and preparedness that not only help them in their current recovery, but also that can be resources and skills they can use for future recoveries in order to hope that those recoveries in the future aren't as deep and they don't take quite as long. And so we spend the first day with the kids creating a space that they can feel safe in. We do that by using what we call a spirit of accompaniment. And our goal with that is that our volunteers at the camp develop authentic relationships with the campers. And they are there to accompany the camper in their walk throughout the whole week. And if that means that during the week the camper is there and they want to just be present and have fun and run around and have the opportunity to be a child again, we are happy to do that with them. If that means that the child is there in order to talk about their trauma, talk about the experience that they've gone through, then we are there to listen and to create that space for them to process. And so that's kind of what we use as our guide for the spirit of accompaniment. And so the first day, we focus a lot on helping the children develop a sense of self-worth. We want them to understand themselves as unique and special. And so the catchphrase for the first day is, I am somebody special. There's no one else like me. I like the way I am. This is who I want to be. And so we are helping to create that safe space for them so that they can feel comfortable for the rest of the week. The following day, which is normally a Tuesday, is the Storm Story Day. And this is the opportunity where the children are able to self-select a story that they can share. And oftentimes that has to do with the trauma they've gone through, the disaster that they've experienced as a family and community. But sometimes we get stories from children that aren't related to the disaster. And so it's something that they view as kind of a storm that they've gone through in their life. And so that day we kind of focus on telling one story, listening and empathy, dealing with anxiety, and identifying support systems. And so the catchphrase for that is, when a storm comes, I'm not scared. Want to know why? Because I am prepared. And so the third day, we are beginning to identify the emotions and feelings that the children are having. So they've kind of developed a safe space with us, and then they have shared with us kind of their experience. And now we want to talk about, what are the feelings they're having? Why are they feeling that way? And so we spend the day kind of processing grief and loss, identifying and naming feelings, working on empathy, and kind of talking about fears and coping strategies. And so for the third day, we say, no matter how I feel today, I'm looking forward to a better day. And for the fourth day, we're looking at kind of gifts and talents. We're identifying them as a survivor, developing teamwork, and understanding diversity. So now that we've kind of shared the story, kind of understand how we're feeling, and we're not alone in how we're feeling, we want them to kind of see that they have these unique skills, these unique gifts and talents to kind of help them kind of move forward from the trauma in the process. And so we say, when things are tough, I learn a lot about who I am and what I've got. And on the fifth day, we're focusing on nurturing a sense of hope for the future, identifying future goals, community support systems, kind of seeing how they can be involved in the community. And so we talk about hopes and dreams, and we say, my future is bright, filled with sunbeams. I have hopes, I have dreams. And so that's the process that we kind of work with the children in order to kind of help them process at their own pace the recovery that they're going through. And that's all made possible through the use of our volunteers. Our camps are led by anywhere between 20 to 30 volunteers in order to make that happen. And we are able to train our volunteers, they're background checked, and they come together to execute each Camp NOAA. At each camp, we also have a mental health professional on site as well. And this individual is there in order to help the kids process in a professional way, and they're also there to offer support for the staff and for the volunteers that are there as well. We are part of the long-term recovery process. So in general, that means we partner with communities 6 to 18 months after a disaster. And this timeline can kind of change based upon how and where the community is at in their recovery. And so we kind of flex, and we have that intentional conversation with the community to kind of see where they're at, and to see if, one, if there's a need for Camp Noah in the community, and two, if it's possible for us to be partnering with them. Because one of our goals is not to bring Camp Noah to a community, but we want to be working with the community in order to help bring that hope and healing to their families. And so what we've been working on the last year or so is that we really want to be reflective of the community. And so because of that, each one of our Camp Noahs ends up looking slightly different. We want to be able to adjust the delivery and curriculum to fit the specific needs of the community. And so to do that, we have the community help identify who it is that we're going to be serving, who are the kids that will be at camp. And so we want to make sure that the curriculum reflects the cultural makeup of the kids. And we are working on finalizing the translation of our curriculum and take-home materials into Spanish. And we'll be working on translating them into Vietnamese as well. And what we know from talking with subject matter experts, and what we know from talking with parents on past camps, is that if we are able to create a space for the children to process their trauma and experience, and we want to make that space conducive for each child, it's helpful if we're able to incorporate food, stories, language, and other aspects of their culture into their Camp Noah experience. That way, each child is kind of able to identify the space as their own. It's a comfort to them, and that kind of helps the whole process that I outlined earlier. We're also working on a parent component so that we can involve the parents in kind of bringing them along and help them to understand what their child is going through, so that they can be a support when they go home. And so in this past year, we did 15 Camp Noah events in various states, Texas, California, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Florida, and Puerto Rico. We served 981 campers through the work of 297 volunteers. We found that the surveys we did for all the campers, of the campers that responded, 97.6% of campers reported learning 2 or more resiliency skills at Camp Noah. And so we are a small office located in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we find that, as Aren had noted earlier, that the rate of natural disasters in the country is increasing and happening at an alarming rate. And we find that we're limited by our capacity. In order to reach communities, we try to reach as many as we can, but we know that it takes time and a lot of work by a lot of people to get each Camp Noah off the ground. And so we're looking forward in the future here to working with partners that kind of help us address those capacity needs, whether it be the short time we have to raise funds, or whether it be the short time we have to mobilize our volunteers. And so we are looking forward to increasing the overall capacity of Camp Noah, and help us to continue to bring hope and healing to communities across the country.
Thanks, David. I mean, how can you go wrong with a camp designed to meet the needs of kids and bring resiliency into their minds? I love it. It's just incredible what you do. I want to remind everybody that you are more than welcome to ask any question you want. Just go ahead and go to that Q&A box. There's already one question that has come in. I'm hopeful that you have other questions for our awesome speakers that we have here today. I'm going to turn the mic over to Cari Logan again, our final presenter for the day, before we move into our Q&A time. So Cari?
Hi, thank you. I just want to say, I'm a project manager for the Midwest Consortium for Disaster Services, which is a collaboration of 4 Lutheran disaster affiliates who work in the Midwest, so North and South Dakota, Minnesota, and Missouri. As people who work in the recovery space in our local state-based places, we see a lot of what happens in small, isolated communities after disaster. So we're walking into places where sometimes the resources are not there, but we still see the challenges for children as they recover and for families that recover. And so I am always excited to hear about these fantastic programs and how to move that forward. And I'm always also very interested in how do we take these resources and ensure that communities across the country of any size can have access to those resources or can also share their ideas. I think as I've worked, I've seen fantastic and really interesting, innovative things happening in places where we might not be able to bring a Camp Noah or a Save the Children program, or childcare where may need some additional support there as well. They may not have a childcare provider immediately there to work with. And so there's great and creative ideas. One of them that I know that has been working in Missouri recently is supporting of social workers in the school. Noting that those teachers and social workers are the ones that are noticing what's happening for children and maybe aren't always making that connection that this new or emerging behavior is happening because of the disaster, and then being able to make that connection to a disaster case manager and the community then to come around that family and to solve some of those ongoing issues related to housing in order to help that child and that entire family bounce back. So I'm excited to see how these things, and I think that's part of what we're doing together as a working group as well, is to begin to talk about how are these things scalable both up and down, and what resources can we have together. So our working group is still in its forming stage, and we're working to engage stakeholders. So we met in Minneapolis in October. So here's a couple pictures of that initial meeting. And the initial members who you've heard on the call today, we invited a group of experts and practitioners from varied organizations and backgrounds to discuss the known resources, the challenges in delivering those known services, and the gaps where services and resources do not exist or cannot be accessed. And so one of the things that we did is also invite the Collaborative for Children, who is a group in, and I just wanted to highlight them real quick, from Texas. And they've been working after Hurricane Harvey and been doing some very innovative and great things there. Their goal is to meaningfully improve the quality of early childhood education and care for Greater Houston's children through those who are the most influential in their lives. So they're doing innovative and timely work in the Houston area and assisting child care providers with the tools and resources needed to recover. And so I just wanted to have that come up on the screen, and would just highly also recommend checking out the work that they did, and would be happy to, I'm sure they would be happy to share those pieces with you if you're interested in that as well. So in our preliminary conversation with this group that we brought together, some of the initial themes were that the investment in current programming or services at the local level to support children is vital. So there was a lot of mention made of supporting local ongoing services through training, resources, mentoring, and targeted programming. Teachers, school administrators, school social workers, child care providers, faith leaders, including people that do youth and children's ministry, and the local nonprofits are service providers that can and should be empowered and equipped to continue to do this work. But they also need care as well. So those who are working directly in the community on an ongoing basis need support and care as caregivers as they care for the children there. Another theme came that more attention is needed to connect the disaster impact on children, families, and caregivers to the economic, social connectedness, and social service system needs of the community. So an example is that understanding that disaster can increase the number of domestic violence instances in a community, and knowing that can help spur additional resources for disaster mental health opportunities to ease the burden on local domestic violence shelters. Another example is connecting that where childcare is not available after disaster, parents cannot go back to work. Therefore, the economic system of the community recovers more slowly. And knowing this and understanding this better can help to prioritize the repair and rebuilding of childcare facilities in the community. The last kind of theme that came out of it was that the time, tools, funding, and access are challenges that need to be addressed. So examples of that were that a coordinated effort to create a continuum of service for children impacted by disaster that is scalable to the scope of the disaster, the size of the community, and the resources available as needed. That funding and resources tend to go to larger systems, high attention disasters, and areas or schools with high tax bases, and short-term response organizations. More funding and resources need to flow to preparing systems, both large and small, such as emergency responders, childcare providers, schools, mental health providers, and public health, for children's needs post-disaster and to sustaining long-term recovery needs of children and families. And opportunities abound to support existing organizations who focus specifically on children post-disaster and those whose work intersects with the human need after disaster. So we talked about affordable housing, childcare needs, education, spirituality, mental health, food, and social connection. So as our working group continues to solidify and to promote the needs of children and their caregivers and to engage others, we're working on a couple activities. Our working group activities involve this development of a list of what, where, and how children's resources can be made available to communities before and after disaster. Developing a list of resources needed but not yet identified, and developing a process to engage funders and partners in supporting the work of our partners as they do this fantastic work across the country in helping children recover. So this webinar was also part of our initial goals, and we will continue to share as we move along in our work what resources and things that we find and can make available in that piece as well. So we would like to invite you who are here and who are interested to join us in the conversation. And there are a couple ways that you can do that. One is if you are interested in being part of the working group and the conversation, there's some opportunities for that. So please feel free to email. There's 2 emails here at the bottom of the screen. So Nancy Beers or Elena Hendrick. You can email them and just say that you would be interested in finding out more about becoming part of the working group and our meetings. The other pieces that we would love to hear from you are, as we're creating this resource guide, is your resources, programs, or ideas. So what things are you doing or have you seen done after in this space of children and disasters, and what are the outcomes of those? And then for those of you who make grants or see that funding and how that flows, we'd love to hear your stories and testimonials about successful grant making to serve children during recovery. So that is who we are as a working group. And so I just wanted to also just say again, thank you for your time and attention today. I believe that the biggest change in this area of children's disaster will come when there are more people at the table. When there are people in every disaster related conversation who recognize what impacts the children, and that what impacts the children impacts the whole recovery of a community. It impacts the planning and the response of the community. And when there are more people at the table who look at funding and providing training and service and advocating for children, then we'll continue to see innovative, community-centered, and led opportunities to address these gaps and challenges that we've noted. And that communities, no matter what their size or location, will not be left alone. My hope is that after what you've heard today and from these incredible organizations that serve children and the opportunities and needs identified by this first part of our working group, each one of you will be one of those people at the table in every disaster-related conversation that asks, how does this impact the children? And how would focusing some of our resources, funding, and attention on children lead to earlier, sustainable, holistic recovery for the entire community? So thank you again for your time today.
Thanks, Cari. I think you said it just so beautifully, is how will this impact children? And so that maybe should be our tagline, our theme line for the rest of the day, the rest of the week for all of us. We're going to now open it up to open question and answer. Thank you to the 3 of you who have already posed questions. I'm actually going to dive in with the first question, and I think it's geared toward Holly, but maybe has a little of Cari or others in it. Holly, I'm curious how you all use brain science, and I'm riffing off of something you said in your opening remarks, but how do you use brain science to develop your programming? I'm thinking about ACEs, right, the Adverse Childhood.
Right.
Okay.
I would say that what our training is geared towards relationships, especially for children under the age of 3, when their brain development is growing the fastest. We talk about the critical need for routines for those children, for comfort and support, caregivers that know that child well. So that means a limited number of caregivers, not multiple teachers that are trying to read that child's cues. So we do talk a lot about providing comfort and security for children through those daily interactions, and not just in thinking about how you would respond to a disaster, but how you're doing on an everyday basis with them, so that they feel that security, so that when you're in the midst of a disaster, that you can turn to those skills and children feel comforted by that. So it's embedded throughout all of our curriculum, especially when we talk about that social emotional need that children have.
And Regine,
That
this
makes
is
sense.
Aren.
Yeah, go ahead.
Add to that.
Please do.
From children's perspective, we've partnered with 0 to 3 to create curriculum called Shelter from the Storm. And so that the materials that were created for that are really applicable in shelters and childcare settings, and particularly take into consideration the psychosocial needs of children in that particular age group from 0 to 3 and then on up, including specific information such as an article that is called Shelter from the Storm, Tips for Parents and Caregivers of Babies and Toddlers. And then there are other resources available that are specifically geared towards educators and early child care professionals.
Thank you. Okay, that's a good add too. Cari, anything to add from your end, or you can say no?
I would just say that, so having also worked with the Camp NOAA program before I came over to Lutheran Social Services of North Dakota and watching that, that all interacts, and we're constantly looking at how the everyday crisis and the everyday effects of trauma on some of our kiddos can be relieved in some senses. So we used to talk about how Camp NOAA could be an opportunity to serve kids where the disaster becomes that chance for them to come and learn some of those skills where they may have not been provided some of those services before. So we were looking at ACEs and all of those pieces as well in the lives of kids, and recognizing that for some of the kiddos after a disaster, this was just like the smallest of things that had happened to them compared to some of the other ongoing doses of trauma that they had received. And for other that I saw, this was the big storm story. This was the big piece of their life. But in every case, it gives us the opportunity, even as a case manager, talking to people about their children gives me the opportunity to build in some of those trauma resiliency skills as they're interested in thinking about how can I help my kids more than they're always interested in thinking about the impact on their own emotional and spiritual health. And so, again, disaster kind of creates, in a strange way, it creates some opportunity to begin to do some healing for people who would not have those resources.
That makes sense, and appreciate the silver lining orientation. David, there's 2 questions in the queue for you. The first is, I'll read them both and then have you just weigh in on them both. The first is whether or not Camp NOAA is a residential camp. And then the second is, it says, Camp NOAA seems unique to me because it provides prepared resources for anyone wishing to deliver a session. Can you talk about that out-of-the-box delivery?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have covered those things, but you try to cram so much in on so little time. Camp NOAA is often delivered in a day camp setting. So it's usually 9 to 3 each day with breakfast and lunch being provided plus a couple snacks. It is not an overnight camp, so the children go back to their homes in the evening. And then as far as the out of the box, we try very hard to not strain the capacity of the community. And so in order to do so, we want them to not feel burdened having to do some of, acquiring of the supplies. So we work with each community to ship to them all the supplies they need for the camp. That includes paints, brushes, tablecloths, puppets, puppet stages, costumes, skit guides, everything they need to do the curriculum for Camp NOAA is provided to them from us. And so we try, just to alleviate the stress of the community and not have to worry about that.
That's super helpful. Thanks, David. We have another question out there. You're going to hear me reading off the page here, gang. But it says, these presentations are all absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for hosting this webinar. I have a question for the speakers, building on David's point regarding capacity in the face of the rising number of disasters. Do these wonderful organization groups have a quote unquote score sheet where if a disaster reaches a certain threshold, they choose to deploy? Or is there some other systematic way that the organizations choose to deploy? Aren, do you want to start off the answer to this question?
Sure, absolutely. So we've recently gone through some internal changes at Save the Children to strategize and streamline more efficiently our response, preparedness, and recovery processes so that everything is under one umbrella of our domestic emergencies unit within our U.S. programs and advocacy. So with that, we do have a domestic emergencies working group that basically every time that there's an event within the U.S., we send out a pre-alert message, and then that pre-alert message continues to trickle throughout our leadership. So it's strategically sent to a select group of people, and then from there, the domestic emergencies working group, which is key positions within our organization, convenes to discuss that emergency if it meets a certain criteria for us, which is set internally. And basically that criteria looks at the number of children affected, the unmet needs that are happening. So we're gathering information throughout that whole process from local voluntary organizations active in disaster, as well as state VALs, as well as connecting to the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the voluntary agency liaisons. And then in addition to that, working with our Childcare Resource and Referral Network, partnering with Holly at Childcare Aware, and then making sure that we're collecting all the information available. So like the National Center for Domestic Preparedness at University of Columbia, or Columbia University, sorry, is one of our partners for mapping as well. So they send us a wide plethora of information, and with all of that, our domestic emergencies unit takes that all into consideration for the domestic emergencies working group. Sorry, lots of acronyms. And with that, we kind of rank or categorize disasters based on the impact to children specifically, and then based on a number of other factors, including like our Head Start programming, our education programming, and where we're currently meeting needs, and then in addition to that, just what the overall landscape of that disaster looks like. So, in some cases it's very cut and dry for us, but in the majority of cases, even if we're unable to send a deployment team, we're still providing technical assistance through whatever teams we have available in partnerships to the local resources on the ground. So it looks a little bit different for catastrophic events as it would for a low attention, small scale flood event in Missouri per se. However, we are doing our best to build capacity locally so that the more local resources on the ground, the better able we are to provide that technical assistance and other resources such as grant funds, etc., and training and technical assistance after the disaster to meet those needs. I hope that answers your question, Lori, but if not, feel free to contact me.
Super helpful, Aren. Cari, Holly, or David, anything else on your end to answer about the score sheet question?
This is Holly.
Okay,
This is Holly. I would say that the way that we would handle it at Childcare Aware of America is that we're working with the local and state childcare resource and referral agencies and really being a support system to them. So they're already existing in the communities. They're the trusted source. They're the known entity that childcare providers are already turning to for training and technical assistance and advice on quality improvement. So we really just ensure that they have the resources available to respond to those providers in the community that they know well and that the providers trust. So they will be there long after the disaster is, when a lot of national entities come in and provide assistance, they're there for a short term and then they eventually leave. The Childcare Resource Referral Agency will still be there. So our philosophy on it is to really empower and support those local and statewide childcare resource referrals and make sure that they have the resources that they need to support those providers in the community. So We don't necessarily deploy to those parts of the country ourselves, but we work on a local level with our member agencies.
That makes sense, using the network that you guys have, put such attention and care to. One question that I can answer, which is exciting, which is that, yes, this webinar will be online and shareable. Probably tomorrow, maybe Monday, you all will get an email from us that gives a link to the webinar recording, and it also gives a link to the slides, so it goes straight to a YouTube channel. So it's super easy to do that, and it's absolutely shareable. All right, we've got to be really tight and really fast for this one last question here from James Rattling-Leaf. He asked, can you all share your experiences in working with American Indian tribes and what could be opportunities for the future? Cari, you want to start with that one?
I think that I will pass that one to Dave, because I know that they have done that work.
Great, Dave, go for it.
Great, I'll try to keep this brief. We have done some Camp NOAAs with Native communities, and we've had some mixed results, I would say. And to speak to that a little bit, we just met with a cultural broker for Native communities, and she works in a health system here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And to kind of sum up, I think she shared with us some really great insights, and so we're excited to work with her. And she said, as we were listening to her, she said, we no longer need people to tell our stories, but we need people to create space so that we can tell our own stories. And so that's something that we've been thinking a lot about recently at Camp NOAA, of how can we, in the curriculum and working with Native communities, how can we create that space? Not that we come in again with a program, but that how can we adjust our curriculum so that they can tell their stories and be part of that resiliency building process. So yeah, there's some really positive things I think going to happen in the future, and we're excited to be a part of it.
Holly or Aren, anything to add?
Just from my perspective,
Okay.
we're really looking forward to partnering in Nebraska with the VOAD community and hoping that we'll have representation from the Native American tribes as well. So please, if you are, have contacts in that area, please make sure that they get engaged with us through this working group and or other projects that we all have going on.
Thanks, Aren. That's a great ad. Well, we are coming to the close. We are barreling into the top of the hour. So I just want to take a moment to give sincerest thanks to Aren, Holly, David, and Cari for their time and talent that they've given to us today. I know that Nancy Beers and I with the Center for Disaster Philanthropy are so incredibly thankful for the creation of this Children's Disaster Working Group, as well as the good hands, hearts, and minds that are coming around the table to do really important work. I want to echo what Cari had said at the end of her remarks, which is that on Monday, January 28th in St. Louis, Missouri, that's the next meeting of the Children's Working Group. If you're interested in attending, please email Nancy Beers. It's nancy.beers@disasterphilanthropy.org, or you can certainly email any of us who are on the line today. And I'll give my thanks to you all for taking your time. This is December, where it's I know we're all rushing to the end of the year, so thank you all for joining this webinar and helping to make a difference in the lives of disaster-affected children. Thank you so, so much. Have a great afternoon.